Hi there, this is Trent with Igniter Media, and I've got another tutorial for you today that also goes along with a After Effects preset that is available for CS3 and above. And I'll get to the preset in just a sec. Just so you know, we're going to be talking about tilt shift, so keep that in mind. All right, this is sort of a little mock-up that I did for the Graceway welcome video when Igniter and Graceway came together, and have a little layer here. We can look in there and see that my logo here for Echo is keyed out of a photo I took with my iPhone and placed nicely in this little comp. It's in 3D space, so you can see that I actually have depth of field in here. And my camera, I will open this up and you can see if I turn depth of field off, it's interesting still with my little blue kind of gradient background and my wood floor, but the wood floor looks a little weird because it's got such a hard edge on it, and making this have depth of field is possible with the camera, obviously. Turn that on there, and you can see it falls off pretty nicely back there. Got a nice sharp focus. Changing that is kind of sketchy at best. There are no real tools for kind of seeing what you're doing. You can set up some expressions to follow the point of the 2D layer, or sorry, the layer here that will keep it in focus. But you know, seeing where the focus falls off and all that kind of stuff is not as intuitive. And there's a little bit of low res preview there, but I don't know, it still takes a long time to render and can possibly be frustrating. If you just get off a little bit, your focus can go away pretty quickly. So what I did is I got inspired by some tilt shift stuff that was going on around the community, specifically the Sherlock BBC opening titles, which are very, very cool. And I created a tilt shift blur matte for After Effects. It's a preset you can just drop right into. It's a preset you can just drop right into your main comp, and it's got visual feedback. And I'll just go now and show you how to use it and what it can do. So I'll jump out to my Finder here. I'm gonna hide everything. And this is the effect, the preset. I'll take this and come over to After Effects CS5 presets. I have some Dallas AEUG presets that I've created, and I'll just drop this into that folder. We'll go back to After Effects, and in my Effects and Presets window, you can also find it here. It's Command 5 on the Mac, Control 5 on the Windows machine, and I'll type in tilt. Oh, doesn't show up. So once I've dropped it in, if I haven't restarted After Effects, I'll hit refresh list. After that's done, I'll type in tilt, and there it is. So now I'll double click it and we'll see what happens. Alright, so you can see already that it's got some interesting stuff going on. I've got a center point, I've got an angle for my gradient, and a distance slider. Now what really is going on here? Let's take a look real quick. I'm going to hit UU to twirl down all the interesting things. And First thing is, it's a shape layer. Shape layers are usable inside your main comp and very useful inside your main comp because they process first before any of the other effects. So previously, with things like gradients or mattes or anything, you would need to pre-comp if you were going to use the layer as part of an effect like a gradient wipe or a matte or mask. But the shape layer, as long as everything happens inside this contents drop down, all the size and the path and the strokes and fills and all that stuff, as long as everything happens in here, the shape layer reproduces it before it does anything else. So a shape layer can be used inside your main comp as a reference layer without being pre-comped. Now let's see. Anytime you apply this shape layer preset, it just goes ahead and fills the screen using this expression here. So if I were to change, I'll hit Command K to pull up my composition settings, change this to 1920 by 1080. You can see that the shape layer fits itself to the screen, the size, okay? And now I'll actually go back to 1280 by 720. And let's look down here. The gradient fill is a white to black to white gradient. It's a linear gradient, and I have a start point and an end point that have some really fun math that the developers up here at Igniter Media helped me with. And that math translates this center point, which always defaults to the center of your comp, plus value. You can center that out real quick and see that it centers itself up right in the middle. And an angle slider and a distance slider. Okay, the angle slider and the distance slider are what drive this math up here. The distance slider gives me, you can see, let's pull this down, zoom in on that guy, and you can see the distance slider spreads the start point and end point of the gradient out. All right. Pull back up here, and there's just the last part there is the center point. And I do have my opacity down, so in case I have this on top of something, I can see what's going on. So let's see. My camera, I will turn off my depth of field. And let's see this shape layer sitting on top of my composition. All right. Now I don't want necessarily, when I do my blurring, I don't want my layer here to be blurred out, but we will see what happens anyway. I'm going to create a solid, layer new solid, and just make it the comp size. Doesn't matter what color it is for this. I'll name it 1280 by 720 in case I need another one of those later. And I'm going to make it an adjustment layer. You could also just go here, new adjustment layer. That'll do about the same thing. And what I want to do now, since I've turned off my depth of field in my camera, I'm going to put on my adjustment layer the compound blur effect. Blur, oops, undo, let's go back here, blur and compound blur. Now use my shape layer as the blur layer, and let's see, now if I come up here and turn the opacity down on my shape layer, you can see that I've got really nice blur going on. And just quickly can set up my center point for my blur, and you can see what's going on. Now it is a little goofy. Though it renders really fast, it doesn't have the edge blending or edge repeating that Fast Blur has. So the edges will fall off. That needs to be accounted for later. But it renders way faster than the camera blur. And you can really crank the blur up pretty heavy. Now, you can see though that my logo here is blurring out at the top. I don't want that at all. So what I'll do is I'll put my my adjustment layer, which I'll name it my, let's see, depth of field. Yeah, I'll put that behind my Echo logo and right there between the Echo logo and my floor right there. Now my blue gradient back there is sitting way off in space. I like that guy to be to fill the back of the screen, and in order to have that happen, let's take a look at the 3D-ness of that. I've got my camera set up in 3D space, my blue gradient set up in 3D space, so if I move my camera around at all, my background, my blue gradient background is going to move, and I would need to really scale that guy up crazy if I wanted to have any latitude with my camera pans. So let's get rid of the 3D on that guy and just scale him 100%, which is way too big for that comp. So we'll scale that down like that, 66.7, and put the wood floor back in. Okay, so now I have a little more latitude because my gradient background is not going to go anywhere. We'll just move him up a little bit like that. My wood floor, move it down a tad. And no, let's leave that where it is. Alright, so I'm going to check out my layer there, get it back in the frame, and you can see that when I pan around, the floor and the layer pan, but the background does not. Now my layer is in focus, and everything else is blurred out. Okay, so I've got my compound blur. What the compound blur does is it takes the light and dark information from my shape layer, my blur matte here. Wherever there's black, there is no blur. Wherever there's white, there is, right here, a maximum blur of 20. Okay, so I can change my blur here. Let's see what happens. I'm going to change my blur. Depth of field layer, change my blur down. You can see the blur changing. Again, this is way faster. It still looks pretty real, but it's way faster than the camera blur renders. All right, and let's just go back to about 12, and I can use my shape layer to change the distance of my depth of field so that everything blurs out pretty quick, or take it up here so that just get it enough sharpness here and enough blur back here so that the floor kind of blends into the background. And I'll make sure you can see what's happening. Let's take the do UU and swirl down these guys so you can see the start and end point. I'll zoom out a tad. There's my start and end points. And you can see that if I adjust this down like that, my start and end points are really tight, close to each other. If I take this back out, my start and end points go crazy far away from each other. Okay, so let's just go down to 400, and there they are. My angle slider changes the positioning of those guys. I just want to keep it at probably 90. 0 straight up and down. And then come back down here and zoom back in so we can see what's going on. It looks pretty good. In order to change the way this guy looks, we need a pre-comp so that we can get rid of the black around the edges. We'll just take this and pre-comp it by dragging down here. And you can see, if we look behind there, we have the transparency. And I'll just take my blue gradient, drop it in the background, put a fast blur on it, repeat edge pixels, and then I will, let's organize this correctly, put that in my pre-comps. That'll be my final. And I'm going to do one more thing, that is to effect distort transform. With my transform, I can scale in just a tad, just kind of a zoom in, and get rid of that around the edges. Alright, not really much of a quality change there, and looks pretty nice. Now one more note there is that in this comp here, call this pre-comp. In this comp here, if I want to move the logo around, and I am interested in expressions, I can actually have the depth of field center, under the shape layer, follow this guy. Now I can just animate it around, centered up there. That's pretty fast. Just take the logo again, move it over here, bring it forward, and move the center point again. There. Now I've refocused everything so that works out pretty easy. A little expression in there, and you can actually track the anchor point of the logo and just drop the center point right on there anywhere you move. That's not why I'm doing this tutorial, so I'll leave that up to you right now. Alright, let's create a new comp, and we'll call this tilt shift. Okay, and I'm going to import file. Let's go to London Skyline. I got this off of Stock Exchange, sxc.hu. I've got my London Skyline in there. Let's see, this layer is 3000 by 2000. I want my tilt shift layer to be, my comp to be 1280 by 720, so I need to scale this guy down, which is pretty big. I'll scale here and hit V so I can grab this guy and scoot him up a little bit. And now that he's in there, I'll just double click on my tilt shift blur mat again. There it is. I'm going to apply my compound blur just straight to the London Skyline layer and use my shape layer, and just right out of the gate that looks pretty fun. So maybe we can just tweak it a tad and maybe we can just put this area in focus right here. So turn up my opacity a little bit, get my angle right. That's the visual feedback I'm talking about with this thing. I'll move that up there, change my angle a little bit more, and bring my distance in a bit. There we go. Take my opacity on that back down, and bang. Let's change the blur to about 12. And that looks really fun, really nice. And if I want to change that, let's go take the opacity back up, change my angle, and say we just want this area over here in focus. Center point, just put it right where I want it, and take my opacity back down. There we go. You can see pretty quickly that the visual feedback and the speed at which this thing renders is pretty nice. Drop that down there. Let's get the bridge in focus a little bit. There we go. Animatable, fun. You can use this at parties. And let's see, background there. Can't really see anything behind there, but just for fun, let's take this. We'll remove the compound blur after duplicating the London skyline. Go into the fast blur. It's not a bad idea to just go ahead and do that right there, so that there's no bleed off of the screen. Now let's look real quick here. I want to make sure though that this is correct. I think I made a little mistake there because my layer is taller than my shape layer. It's using this stretch here. Turn that off, and you can see that my shape layer actually does the blurring inside that area. If I stretch it, it's actually doing maybe the blur a little differently than I need it to, blurring in the wrong spots. So instead of just using the straight picture, if your video is 1280 by 720 or 1920 by 1080, whatever that's just the shape you're going to use for your video, that's fine. But since this is bigger than my HD video, taller than rather, what I want to do is pre-comp this. So I'll go composition, layer, pre-compose. London skyline, HD, pre-comp. Move all attributes, okay. Well, that kind of screwed things up a little bit because it took the shape layer with it and it still has the compound blur. I did want the position to stay the same, but everything else came over as well. I'll go back here to tilt shift, put my blur, sorry, not fast blur, my compound blur back on, shape layer 12. There we go. Now you can see it's hitting the edges there, and because of that, I'll duplicate, I'll get rid of the compound blur, put the fast blur on that one behind there, repeat edge pixels, and blur that out a little bit. So now I've got my shape layer up, I can see what I'm doing, and it's 1-to-1 on the boundaries of my layer. Maybe that's a little much. Let's go down to 5 and see. Okay, it's a little better. But you know, animating this thing, you can actually have the focus kind of change, rack focus across the deal. Get that in focus, then get that in focus over there. And this really kind of saved my bacon when I was doing my project for the Graceway bit, because I wanted to be able to change my focus quickly. I wanted to keep my logo layers in focus and really sharp, and this particular technique helped me quickly get everything taken care of and rendered out quickly, because it doesn't take quite as long to render as the camera blur does when you put depth of field on the camera. So there you go. If you want to get this effect preset, I'll make the link available in the blog and on the Dallas After Effects user group website, dallasaeug.com. I'm Trent. Thanks for joining me. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at AE Trent.